your pencils and papers. Yo, yo, yo. Reading is fun and math is great, but now it's time for Art with Miss Kate. Miss Kate in the house.
Thank you for our ever-changing theme song. How many of you artists have noticed that since John came up with the theme song, it's been different in every single lesson? He's really stretching his creativity. So Emmylou the art dog and I are going to teach you about two bad ants today. And we're going to do a lesson with pencil, Sharpie, and colored pencils, and paper. Okay. This book has very cool pictures because everything looks really, really huge because the ants are really, really small. Okay? So I'm going to read you the story, and I want you to notice how the artist, Chris Van Allsburg, makes everything look really big, even though the pictures aren't really big. And then we'll look at some artwork, and then we'll get to work. Two bad ants. The news traveled swiftly through the tunnels of the ant world. A scout had returned with a remarkable discovery, a beautiful, sparkling crystal. When the scout presented the crystal to the ant queen, she took a small bite, and then she quickly ate the entire thing. She deemed it the most delicious food she had ever tasted. Nothing could make her happier than to have more, much more. The ants understood. They were eager to gather more crystals because the queen was the mother of them all, and her happiness made the whole ant nest a happy place. It was late in the day when they departed. Long shadows stretched over the entrance to the ant kingdom. One by one, the insects climbed out, following the scout, who made it clear. There were many crystals where the first had been found, but the journey was long and dangerous. They marched into the woods that surrounded their underground home. Dusk turned to twilight, twilight to night. The path they followed twisted and turned, every bend leading them deeper into the dark forest. More than once, the line of ants stopped and anxiously listened for the sounds of hungry spiders, but all they heard was the call of crickets echoing through the woods like distant thunder. Dew formed on the leaves above. Without warning, huge cold drops fell on the marching ants. A firefly passed overhead that for an instant lit up the woods with a blinding flash of blue-green light. At the edge of the forest stood a mountain. The ants looked up, and they could not see its peak. It seemed to reach right up into the heavens, but they did not stop. Up the side they climbed, higher and higher. The wind whistled through the cracks of the mountain's face. The ants could feel its force bending their delicate antennae. Their legs grew weak as they struggled upward. At last they reached a ledge and crawled through a narrow tunnel. When the ants came out of the tunnel, they found themselves in a strange new world. Smells they had known all their lives. Smells of dirt and grass and rotting plants had vanished. There was no more wind, and most puzzling of all, it seemed that the sky was gone. They crossed smooth, shiny surfaces and then followed the scout up a glassy, curved wall. They had reached their goal. From the top of the wall, they looked below to a sea of crystals. One by one, the ants climbed down into the sparkling treasure. Quickly, they each chose a crystal and then turned to start the journey home. There was something about this unnatural place that made the ants nervous. In fact, they left in such a hurry that none of them noticed the two small ants who stayed behind. "Why go back?" one asked the other. "This place may not feel like home, but look at all these crystals." "You're right," said the other. "We can stay here and eat this tasty treasure every day forever." So the two ants ate crystal after crystal after crystal until they were too full to move, and they fell asleep. Daylight came. The sleeping ants were unaware of changes taking place in their newfound home. A giant silver scoop hovered above them and then plunged deep into the crystals. It shoveled up both ants and crystals and carried them high into the air. The ants were wide awake when the scoop turned, dropping them from a frightening height. They tumbled through space in a shower of crystals and fell into a boiling brown lake. Then the giant scoop stirred violently back and forth. Crushing waves fell all over the ants. They paddled hard to keep their tiny heads high above water, but the scoop kept spinning the hot brown liquid. Around and around it went, creating a whirlpool that sucked the ants deeper and deeper. They both held their breath and finally bobbed to the surface, gasping for air and spitting out mouthfuls of terrible, bitter water. Then the lake tilted and began to empty into a cave. The ants could hear the rushing water and felt themselves pulled toward the pitch-black hole. Suddenly, the cave disappeared and the lake became calm. The ants swam to the shore and found the lake had steep sides. They hurried down the walls that held back the lake, and the frightened insects looked for a place to hide, worried that the giant scoop might shovel them up again. Close by, they found a huge round disc with holes that could neatly hide them. But as soon as they climbed inside, their hiding place was lifted, tilted, and lowered into a dark space. When the ants climbed out of the holes, they were surrounded by a strange red glow, and it seemed to them that every second the temperature was rising. It soon became so unbearably hot they thought they would be cooked. Suddenly, the disc they were standing on rocketed upward, and the two hot ants went flying through the air. They landed near what seemed to be a fountain, a waterfall pouring from the silver tube. Both ants had a powerful thirst, and they longed to dip their feverish heads into the refreshing water. They quickly climbed along the tube. As they got closer to the rushing surface, the ants felt a cool spray. They tightly gripped the shiny surface of the fountain and slowly leaned their heads into the falling stream. But the force of the water was much too strong. The tiny ants were pulled off the fountain and plunged down into a wet, dark chamber. They landed on half-eaten fruit and other soggy things. Suddenly the air was filled with loud, frightening sounds. The chamber began to spin. The ants were caught in a whirling storm of shredded food and stinging rain. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise and the spinning stopped. Bruised and dizzy, the ants climbed out of the chamber. In daylight once again, they raced through puddles and up a smooth, narrow wall, and in the distance they saw something comforting. Two long, narrow holes that reminded them of the warmth and safety of their old underground home. They climbed into the dark openings. But there was no safety in these holes. A strange force passed through the wet ants. They were stunned senseless and blown out of the holes like bullets from a gun. When they landed, the tiny insects were too exhausted to go on. They crawled into a dark corner and fell asleep. Night had returned when the battered ants awoke to a familiar sound, the footsteps of their fellow insects returning for more crystals. The two ants slipped quickly to the end of the line. They climbed the glassy wall and once again stood amid the treasure, but this time they each chose a single crystal and followed their friends home. Standing at the edge of their ant hole, the two ants listened to the joyful sounds that came from below. They knew how grateful their mother queen would be when they gave her their crystals, and at that moment the two ants felt happier than they'd ever felt before. This was their home, this was their family, and this was where they were meant to be. So they went into a kitchen to get some sugar, and they ended up having all kinds of adventures, didn't they? Some of them were not very safe. Let me show you some examples, and then we'll make a drawing. Chris Van Allsburg used lines a lot in his illustration style. Maybe you noticed that. To change shape and to make things look three-dimensional. And he also used dots. If you cross your lines over each other like here, it's called cross-hatching, and if you just use dots, it's called stippling. And here, I just used dots going in the direction of the item the ants were crawling on. Here's a cupcake and a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. I must have had a sweet tooth that day, huh? Here is coffee, the coffee pot, and the sugar, what the ants came to get. Here's another coffee with an espresso pot, a regular cup of coffee, and some strawberries. Here you can see the stippling again, and here you can see the cross-hatching. Those are some techniques we're going to try today. This one's not finished. It's a cheese board. So here's some cheese, some Swiss cheese, and some other cheese, and here's the cutting board, and here's the knife. This is my closet. The ants got in my closet. Here's some clothes that are hanging up. Some more cross-hatching, some more lines indicating direction. This one my husband made, and it says, "Welcome to Ant Book." I think it's supposed to be Facebook for ants. So he's got a computer board. He's got a lot of stippling and a lot of cross-hatching. This is a blank square that we can work on. Here's a fruit basket in front of a window. Not finished. A breakfast. And here's a picnic. Okay? So what I did to create this shape was I just took my Crayon box and a Sharpie and drew some lines. Alright? You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can also make your square smaller if you want to. You can do this, like all of our art at home lessons, you can do this your way, the way that works best for you. So I am looking right here. Here's a plant. I have a lot of plants in my house. Our spring has been slow to arrive, so I haven't been able to put them out. It's too cold. So here's a plant. And I don't want to go into too much detail with pencil because I know that's hard to see. Here's another one. And they are right across from me as I sit here and do my art at home lessons. Okay? I'm going to switch to Sharpie now because I know pencil is hard for you folks to see. You can do your pencil as long as you want. You don't have to worry about whether someone's filming it or not, right? There's my pot. And I have some poinsettias that I'm turning into trees. I just keep transplanting them and they're getting bigger and bigger. Now they're sort of like little shrubs. I'm hoping they'll turn into trees if I keep at it long enough. Because in tropical areas, poinsettias are trees. Here in this part of the world, they're just small plants. But in other parts of the world, they're much bigger. There's another pot. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time drawing this. I want to show you stippling and cross-hatching. Here's one of my little ants. So we're going to do some pretending now. You know how we do a lot of pretending when I do demonstrations. And we're going to pretend I did a better job drawing the plants, okay? But now let me show you the techniques that Chris Van Allsburg was doing. The easiest one is he did a lot of lines right next to each other like this. Okay? And you could make them also go this way. It can make your artwork look more three-dimensional when you use lines this way. And he's quite masterful at it. He's a very good illustrator. Let me show you stippling now. Stippling is when you use a lot of little dots right next to each other. Okay? That's stippling. And I want to show you cross-hatching. And I'm going to switch to a extra fine point Sharpie for cross-hatching. Let's say I wanted to cross-hatch the stems of my poinsettias. You make a lot of lines close to each other. Then you go the other direction. Then you can even go another direction. And after a while, it'll start to make your art look three-dimensional, depending on which direction you make your lines go when you're cross-hatching. Okay? So now let's do quite a bit of pretending, and let's skip to the coloring step. All I did for my coloring was use colored pencil, but there's different ways you can use colored pencil to achieve different techniques. One way to use colored pencil is to press really hard, like this, and you get a very bold color, right? Another way to use colored pencil is to go very softly, and it's a much more subtle look. You can alternate those two techniques, and with your colored pencil. If you want to, you can also do cross-hatching. You can go more than one direction when you're adding your color. So those are some different techniques you can use with your colored pencil. I hope you enjoy this lesson. And if you ever feel like emailing me pictures of your artwork, I would love to see it. Take care. I miss you.